Coming up on In the Life, public assembly and the birth of a movement.
We had to create settlement houses for this wave of queer immigrants into community.
A conversation with the two longest-serving LGBT executive directors, Kevin Cathcart and Catherine Acey.
I think I'm part of the very first generation of people who really benefited from Stonewall.
And an inspiring portrait of courage.
What you see is what you get.
All this and more on In the Life.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation, Arcus Foundation, New Paul Foundation, the estate of Richard W. Weiland, and by the annual support of In the Life members like you.
Welcome to In the Life. I'm Michael Billy. We don't really know for sure what happened when the Stonewall Inn was raided in June 1969. Some public accounts claim that young kids, drags, and street queens were being held inside the bar, beaten by police officers. True or not, word circulated quickly to a growing crowd. They'd had enough and decided to fight back. Continuing our Summer of Stonewall series, In the Life takes a look at this act of civil disobedience and how it ignited a movement of activism for LGBT rights. Prior to the riots of June 1969, few LGBT groups publicly assembled despite their constitutional right to do so. However, after Stonewall, a movement was born in which LGBT organizations sprang into existence. This next story from 2003 takes an historical look at gay spaces and the groups that sought to mobilize homosexuals at a time when the fundamental meeting place was the bar.
Prior to the 69 riots, the only place where we could come together were bars. And those bars were not conducive to community organizing. They were often quite hostile to their own customers. You know, we mark the beginning of the contemporary queer liberation movement with the Stonewall riots, but we know that really our movement is much older than that. Certainly the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis were pioneers and heroes that risked so much to begin to create a safe space to be an openly gay man or lesbian. These spaces that might be available to us if we were born into an ethnically identified community or religiously identified community were not available to us. And so it's almost like we had to create settlement houses for this wave of queer immigrants into community. And LGBT community centers are those settlement houses.
Gay Liberation Front was sort of, I guess, to be corny, it was the answer to a lot of people's prayers. I mean, it came out of nowhere, and it was gone before you really could say Gay Liberation Front. But what happened in that year and a half, changed so many lives. GLF was born, literally, the first meeting, a group of people said, let's meet and see what we can do with the energy we have here from the riots.
Alternate University, a radical new school in Greenwich Village, offered unorthodox classes on everything from Marxism to karate. And on July 24th, less than a month after Stonewall, Alternate U became the birthplace of the GLF.
It became the place for their first dances, which was just unheard of, that you would publicize a homosexual dance.
But disagreements began on the very first night in the overcrowded room at Alternate U. Some women felt alienated and left to form radical lesbians. The trans community split off to found Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, and still others broke away and started the Gay Activists Alliance.
The founders of the Gay Activists Alliance From their point of view, GLF was not sufficiently structured to get things done, and so they broke off and founded their own organization in December of 1969. They started talking really from the very beginning about needing to find some kind of alternative to the bars, which were seen as being syndicate-run, places that would encourage self-hate rather than an affirmation. So they managed to acquire an old firehouse on Worcester Street in Soho. And among other things, they started to dance every Saturday night. You would have maybe 1,000, almost all men, a few women, coming to dance at what was clearly a political organization. And indeed, there were times when they would hold demonstrations at 1 a.m. in the morning and literally take the entire dance to go harass the city council committee member who was giving us trouble.
Lesbian feminist liberation, LFL is what we called it, grew out of GLF, Gay Liberation Front, and GAA, Gay Activist Alliance, when the women felt that they needed to separate from the men. Lesbian women at that point really needed their own space. We met first at the firehouse and then moved from there to around Union Square and then eventually purchased one of the city buildings on 20th Street. And then were just social gathering places for women. And they were wonderful, and I miss that kind of space.
As black women, we didn't think our needs were being met there. I'm not saying that they weren't doing the work, but they weren't doing the work. We needed something else. So, we got us a space, and we named ourselves Salsa Soul Sisters. We met at the Washington Square Methodist Church, and we met there for many years.
The Lesbian Herstory Archives is a mixture of a museum and a family album. We have archival material and all the wonderful little things that lesbian women have collected all their lives. Back in the 1970s, we would bring people together to have a space to talk and get to know each other. I mean, this was back then when there really were very few spaces that women could go to do anything.
In 1983, many of these divergent political and social groups came together when community leaders acquired an old schoolhouse.
Like 300 organizations existed. There was a lot of activity, but it had no locus. Everybody was spread out in whatever found places they could be. It was such a powerful idea to say, we now can have a piece of real estate that's gay and lesbian owned. It's ours, nobody can take it away from us, and we have control over it.
One of the functions of the center is to create a common ground for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and AIDS activists.
Many organizations have been born here. There are some that people know better than others. Probably the most dramatic story is the birth of ACT UP, which happened in 1987 when Larry Kramer came.
He described what he saw as the epidemic in our community and put forth a call to action. And ACT UP was founded on that Tuesday night.
There are still people who think that this is a white man's organization. When they come in the building, they must see us here. This is a support for all people.
Our history and our culture needs a place to be born and then a place to grow.
Today, there are about probably over 170 LGBT community centers around the United States. When people come into a center, they're not just bringing their gay identity or their lesbian identity, they're bringing the whole package, their race, their age, their religious identification, whether or not they're a parent or want to be a parent, their class. And we as a movement, if we're ever going to get anywhere and achieve the justice that we want for queer people, we have to wake up and know that our agenda has to be justice for all people, and that we've got to consciously work with the choice movement, with the anti-death penalty movement, with an economic justice agenda, in order to get this country where we all want it to be.
In 1973, Lambda Legal was a revolutionary idea, an organization whose principal mission was fighting for gay rights in the nation's courts. It was equally progressive in 1977 when a small group of women created the Estrella Foundation, addressing the lack of funding for women, specifically lesbians and women of color working for social change. Kevin Cathcart and Catherine Acey, the leaders of these organizations, are the two longest-serving executive directors in the movement today. They sat down to discuss their lives in activism, the impact of Stonewall on their generation, and the passion behind their work.
Hi, Catherine.
Hey there, Kev.
I think we met a little more than 20 years ago.
You're looking good.
And what brought you to a life of activism?
I come from a family that just believed in being kind and compassionate with others and giving of yourself to help others. But I didn't officially come out until my late 20s and then got very involved in the queer movement. How did you get involved?
I really became an activist when I was in college, and a lot of it is connected to when I came out. I grew up in New Jersey in a very working class family, and one of the things that was always sort of a quest of mine was this idea of meaningful work, because in the world that I came from, people had jobs, but they didn't have, you couldn't call it meaningful work in any way whatsoever. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I kept thinking there has to be something else and there has to be some other way. And then I started getting politically involved, and then the movement was evolving at the same time that I was evolving. I was pretty repressed growing up, and I had no idea that I was gay. I'm not sure whether or not it was a surprise to anybody else, but it was sort of a surprise to me, and I figured it out pretty quickly once I was away from home and had a little more freedom in my life. I fell in love, and it was all very exciting, and then I realized, oh, wait a minute, there's prices to be paid for this in the world, and that got me sort of fired up and angry. I don't think I would have used the word activist at that time, because either it was a vocabulary that I wasn't familiar with, or I probably wouldn't have been comfortable, because I would have thought, well, activists are like people in New York that are doing big things, not people at a small state college in southern New Jersey organizing a little student group.
I came out in my late 20s, and I was kind of in shock. I was like, oh my goodness. Much like you, it was not a surprise to many people around me, but a surprise to some. But it was a bit of a process over, I think, many years. I always loved women. I was involved in women's issues. I was an activist. So the coming out process was kind of scary at a personal level. My politics included civil rights for LGBT people, but then I became much more connected and felt it both in my gut, not just intellectually, about what it meant to be out and to be active.
Where were you?
I was in New York. I had come to New York. I came to New York in '74 to go to graduate school. When Stonewall happened, I wasn't really a part of the queer movement. I was a part of various social justice movements. I feel it's one huge marker of history, of people's resistance, where folks, even within the LGBT community, transgender folks, butch women, younger people stood up and resisted, and were a catalyst, ignited something that I believe was brewing.
Well, I was in high school when Stonewall happened, and of course I didn't know about it when it first happened. All of my news about the wider world, including anything gay, I got from the Village Voice, which I used to read in high school, so I would know there was a world out there. But I think I'm part of the very first generation of people who really benefited from Stonewall, because just as I was reaching adulthood, the world had changed, and that's what Stonewall, I think, is all about. And what it means to me is that people stood up and said no more, and people said we want this to change, and started fighting for equality and for recognition and for visibility. I mean, it's hard to explain to people today who were not around then, sort of what it was like in pre-Stonewall or even the immediate post-Stonewall days. We do a lot of work at Lambda Legal with young people in schools, for example, who are organizing gay-straight alliances, like an unimaginable concept. When I was in high school, there were no gay people when I was in high school, except for an occasional English teacher who people talked about kind of behind
Not a
his
gym
back.
teacher, an English teacher.
An English teacher. The fact that we're the longest serving EDs in the LGBT movement says something about how new our movement is. Like, we would not be the longest serving EDs, even with our tenures, in almost any other movement that I can think of. It's because our community didn't have any institutions for so long and came to this so recently. You know, the Stonewall wasn't that long ago, and then it took a long time after Stonewall to build organizations that were then able to have staff and become institutions and do the work. You know, I'm very lucky that I've been able to do this work for so long, but it does say something about just how impoverished in a certain way our community is for institutions, for leadership. How many people died who would have been longer serving leaders in the epidemic along the way.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting take on it. I kind of look at it slightly differently, but I could see your point. I never expected to be any place for 21, almost 22 years, in the same job. And in some ways, I've been at the same organization with the same title, but it's been a different job. You know, when I started at Estrella, I was the only staff person. Now there's 19. It's been exciting because the movement has been evolving, the organization has evolved, and it's pushed me. There were times when I thought I was leaving, and then there was a new challenge and something that pulled me back in. And more than just something, it is the work. I mean, I am privileged in this position to meet activists and cultural workers doing, you know, justice work and human rights work all over the world. And so their passion, their struggle, their victories pull me in all the time. It's hard to leave that. There's one story I just love telling this last couple of months because it's an incredible story of organizing, but it's an example of why keep doing this. It's about China and this evolving movement there. And China, has been very difficult for LGBT folks, and particularly for queer women and trans people, but for all. And 2 years ago, there was a leadership institute that brought 100 LGBT women together from 16 to in their 60s, traveled for hours and some for days to get to this site. And out of it grew new organizations, and another institute happened in 5 different regions in China. And out of that now has emerged more organizations, and there's one, and it's a young trans person, and they have a small center and a hotline that is being volunteered by a parent, by his parent. And to me it's like, oh, China, hotline, trans person, lesbian, bisexual, trans women organizing, and a parent, breaks all kinds of stereotypes of what we think is possible in China and what we think, about what Chinese families might think of in China, knowing, what we know about some of the repression of sexual orientation and sexuality. So that's one of the things that keeps me going, to know that really 1,000 queer lives were touched by these leadership institutes, and out of it grew organizations, and with young people and old people being able to be more or their full selves. And that's, to me, that makes the big difference, to be able to get up and go to work in the morning.
Just as there are many accounts of what fueled the Stonewall riots, there are just as many rumors as to who threw the punch that started a revolution. Some say it was Stormy DeLavier, a legendary drag performer in the Jewel Box Revue. But who is Stormy? In 1999, SAGE, an organization for gay and lesbian seniors, honored her with its Lifetime Achievement Award for, in their words, her courage and enthusiasm in crashing the gates of segregation, and for the gender-bending example she showed the world.
Gay people are always looking for role models. It's a cliche, but it's true, and she's as good a one as we're going to find. Someone who's learned how to grow up and grow to a great age and not grow old and still be enthusiastic about life and still capable of making new friendships and, you know, understands more about what life is about than most people.
Who's Stormy? I'm a human being that survived. I've helped other people survive.
Stormy DeLavier was born to a wealthy white father and a black mother in New Orleans, Christmas Eve, 1920, caught between two worlds from the day she was born. Her father had her privately educated while her grandfather raised her.
Well, he finally told me because everybody, the white kids were beating me up, the black kids were beating me, everybody was jumping on me. If it wasn't because of my father's money, it was because of being black, being a Negro with a white face. Yeah. So he told me if I didn't stop running, I'd be running the rest of my life. And when I was 15, I stopped running, and I haven't run a day since.
After leaving home, Stormy sang with jazz bands across the country, developing the silvery baritone that would serve her well in her next incarnation.
So I tried to do the proper thing, you know, wear men's clothes on stage and wear women's clothes on the street. I got picked up twice for being a drag queen. Well, the guy that arrested me once for being a drag queen came in the club and he said, you don't know how to tie. I said, well, if I'm not tying my tie right, why don't you come in every night and show me how I'm supposed to tie? And he did. To this day, I can tie a bow tie with even looking in the mirror, and it'll be perfect. And he was always laughing. He was a nice man. He was only doing his job, you know.
In 1955, Stormy became the one girl in the Jewel Box Revue, a traveling musical show of gender deception. While her girlfriend watched from the wings, Stormy would now perform as a man.
Somebody told me that I couldn't do it and that I would completely ruin my reputation and that people did not have enough problems being black. I said, I didn't have any problem with it. Everybody else did.
She made a very handsome man. It worked for her.
In June of 1969 in New York City, Stormy found herself at the epicenter of the Stonewall riots. If there was a friend in need, Stormy would be there.
That was no riot. Everybody says a riot. It was a disobedience, and then they started fighting back. It was a rebellion. And once they got the hang of it, they rebelled quite well.
Well, many different people say that there was a cross-dressing lesbian who sparked the Stonewall riot, but to the best of my knowledge, no one had ever found someone who fit the description quite as well as she does until I interviewed her, and she said, the cop hit me and I hit him back.
I walked away with an eye bleeding, but he was laying on the ground, out.
She says, I was there and I did this, but then when I read an account of the cross-dressing lesbian who started the riot, she said, oh, I know who that was, but I'm not going to say.
Well, I got into it by accident. And then Charles Kaiser, when he wrote his book, Gay Metropolis, was trying to figure out how it started. When the fight really started, they were just running around, you know, calling names and things and throwing toilet paper down from the windows and what have you. And I just walked up. I used to come in whenever I came in town to go down to see if anybody needed help or if they were in jail. I could get them out, what I could do. I looked like I was 20, but when that happened, I was 48 years old.
In the month following those fateful nights, Stormy's girlfriend of 26 years passed away, and Stormy gave up her performing career. Whether or not Stormy threw that first punch, there is no doubt she has since embraced her role as caretaker. Today, she's a presence throughout New York's West Village and Chelsea neighborhoods.
Sometimes I feel half the universe is my family.
She's still going strong, and it's because she loves life so much. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's because she hasn't grown old or bitter. She's grown mature and still loving and still enthusiastic. And I think she draws a lot of strength from the younger women who she sees in her job. And she acts as mother confessor to many of them. And she has a very large and enthusiastic support group.
She lives her life quietly and does much of what she does very quietly, sometimes anonymously. And I think she's happy doing that, because what matters to her is that she does what she does, not that it, makes a big splash.
This is who I am. Remember the expression, what you see is what you get.
When I look back, I guess I only remember the good, but sometimes the bad.
The growth of the internet has allowed our movement to connect and organize in ways that could only be dreamt of 40 years ago. Imagine what we can achieve in the next 40 years. In Dreams for the Movement, we're asking you to share your vision with us. What are your dreams for the next 40 years of the LGBT movement? Visit our website at inthelifetv.org to find out how you can submit your videos. Your most inspiring dreams will be featured on TV in our October season premiere episode. I'm Michael Billy. Thanks for tuning in, and please join us next month.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation, Arcus Foundation, New Paul Foundation, the estate of Richard W. Weiland, and by the annual support of In the Life members like you.